So this next presenter, I'm happy to introduce to the stage again. This might be your third trip up here, is it? Second. Yeah, the second one. Jen's not a newcomer, but certainly welcome, and we're excited to hear the story of the Jackson family. This was the second reason for the Coney Island lunch. And Jan has another surprise for you all, which I'm going to let her reveal, the big reveal. And I'll let her tell you about that as part of her story. So welcome, Jan, and we're looking forward to hearing about the Jacksons. Jan's last trip to the stage was a story about the Lindstroms.
The Sigurdssons. Yeah.
Now this one's
Ooh, that light is bright. Last summer, the Randy and Karen Jackson sent around a postcard to a number of us, thanks, showing that they had been on Coney for 100 years. And so I thought, ooh, that story needs to be told. So I interviewed Randy, and here we go. It's the story of the Jackson family. I'll tell you a bit about the family, and then I'll talk about the bakery, and then the camp on Coney. So first, the family. On February the 1st, 1833, in County Down, Belfast, Ireland, a baby boy was born and was named Robert Jackson. We know little of his youth, but he immigrated to Stratford, Ontario in 1855. In 1860, Robert married Jane Riggin, born in St. John, New Brunswick, but now a resident of Stratford. It seems there were 13 children born to Jane and Robert. And our story today centers around number 9, Charlie Jackson, and his ancestors. Charlie, along with 3 brothers, left farming in the Stratford area and headed west to find work. Charlie's brother Sam came through Kenora in about 1893 to the Wawanesa area of Manitoba. William and Frederick stopped in Kenora in 1898, and Charlie came in 1902. Charlie Jackson married his first wife, Anna Matheson, in Kenora in 1906. And Charlie and Anna had 4 children. Roberta, born in 1907, Patricia, 1909, Edgar, 1912, and George, 1915. Anna died in childbirth when George was born. Charlie later married Christina, or Teeny as they called her, Craig, who died in 1995, a month shy of her 103rd birthday. Teeny and Charlie had 2 children, twins, born April 26, 1921. They were Doug and Marjorie. Doug was my brother-in-law, married to my late husband's sister, Faith, and so Randy is my nephew. Charlie and his brother William stayed in Kenora, and William's descendants still in Kenora are the Elliots. Fred went to Winnipeg, returning in 1915, and his descendants in Kenora are Marion Jackson and Edna Jackson. And Charlie's descendants living in Kenora are grandchildren Peter Delamere, I know he's here today, and Lois O'Neill, and Mark Hook, and Dave Jackson, and Don Jackson. And the great-grandchildren living in Kenora are Terry Jackson, Cheryl Delamere Hino, and Graham Jackson, and 2 great-great-grandchildren, Molly Jackson, 3, and Shelby and Tyson Hino. So when Anna Matheson Jackson died, it meant Charlie had 4 children under the age of 11, one being a newborn baby. So Georgie was raised for a while by Aunt Annie, one of Charlie's brother's wives. He lived up on 1st Street North by the Armories until he went to school at age 6. And that young man in the kayak is about a 5-year-old Georgie Jackson. And the 4 children from the first marriage are shown here: Edgar, Berta, Patsy, and George, with an unknown older boy. Teenie Craig was part of the Jackson family for a long time before marrying into it. She often told of going to Coney with the family from about 1909 and onward. She worked for Charlie in his restaurant and so was familiar with his children. She and Charlie married in 1918, and here she is in 1921 with the twins, Marge and Doug. In 1925, they bought a house on First Street South, where there was enough room for the full-time gardener, a housekeeper, and the family of 8. They used the whole house upstairs and down, and the 2 back bedrooms over the kitchen were for the staff. This now is it. Recently, I took the picture a couple months ago. And Grandpa Charlie Jackson died at home in 1935 at the age of 56 of colon cancer. And now on to the bakery. Charlie's brothers, Fred and Bill Jackson, came to Kenora in 1898 and started a bakery business at the foot of the Matheson Street Bridge. They moved to the Main Street location in 1900. Charlie came in 1902 and joined them in the business, and it was called the Jackson Brothers Bakery from the get-go. Fred eventually went west to Winnipeg, living there until 1915, when he returned to Kenora, but to farming. And after Bill died, Charlie carried on by himself. This is an early photo of Main Street, in which you can see where the bakery was situated, with an empty lot between it and the Kenrisha Hotel. Like this sign, bakery, fruiterers, all kinds of things they sold in there. Charlie was a good businessman. Not only did he run his bakery, but he was also involved in a number of other businesses, one being the Lake of the Woods Brewing Company. This next picture shows Berta and Patsy in the lane behind the bakery. So probably around 1912, I would think. And this next photo is Charlie in the bakery delivery wagon. And I don't know if you can see that. The phone number is on the side. It's 24. When Charlie died in 1935, Edgar, who was an accountant at the mill, came over to be part of the bakery. Georgie was already working there. Their new positions became business manager for Aggie and bake shop production manager for George. Doug was only 16 and still in high school, so he was too young to permanently work there. Aggie and George ran the business until early 1968, not long after the Keewatin Five Roses flour mill burned down in July of 1967. Randy remembers going to work that morning. He would have been 16, and everyone had long faces. All of Jackson's bakery bread came from the flour mill. That was something I didn't know. Came from the flour mill being baked in their bake shop. The flour mill chose not to rebuild in Keewatin and moved production to Montreal. While the mill was running, bread was delivered to Jackson's every morning. Jackson's trucks then delivered it to the grocery and corner stores. So Jackson's Bakery was not only a bakery, but also a wholesaler. The finished baked goods made in the bakery were also delivered to the grocery stores and all the camps around. There were 2 trucks running all day, every day. One of those went daily to the docks for delivery to camps on Lake of the Woods, as well as the surrounding area. Dave Jackson and Harold Jackson, who was Marion's father, both drove those delivery trucks. Now this Clarence Dusang photo of Jackson's Bakery was taken in 1963. It's probably the picture that a lot of you would remember as teenagers, I guess. After the flour mill burned, George and Aggie tried to find a bakery in Winnipeg to bake the bread, but could find nothing to match the quality of the local flour mill's bake shop. There were no additives, and it was wrapped in wax paper. It had to be eaten in 2 days. George and Aggie had the opportunity to purchase the mill bake shop, but they would have had to put in the power and the water systems, which were gone with the fire. They were in their 60s by then and felt they were not ready to start again. So the bakers, Bob Giles and Ozzie Clark, bought the bakery and ran it for a number of years. I believe Ozzie's daughters are here today. In fact, I was talking to one, so. The original Jackson's Bakery was a satisfying business because at the end of the day, the shelves were empty. However, like any business here, January, February, and March were slow, and they had to borrow money to keep afloat until the summer season arrived. Back in 1922, there was a bread war. What is now McTaggart's was then Safeway, and at one point, Safeway was giving away bread. Charlie ended up selling bread out the back door to Safeway for them to give away. The big chain stores were at work back then. In 2014, we can still see the word Jackson on the old building. And so to Coney, the camp, and the people. I'm very happy that I'm talking about the other side of the island, Mr. Ashdown. The family thinks that Charlie first bought property on Coney in 1909. The first property was down the boardwalk from the present Jackson property. And the present property is located just at the end of the boardwalk where that hydro pole stands in this 1971 photo of young Donnie Jackson, taken looking toward the beach. When the family got the deed for the present camp in recent years, it was discovered that this property was purchased in 1913. He bought 2 lots and built a camp. And the family would move over lock, stock, and barrel every summer, with Charlie going back and forth to work from the island. The first name on the deed is Charles Jackson. It was passed on to the estate of Charlie Jackson. Doug's widow, Faith, bought it from the estate after Doug died in 1983. And now, with Faith's death, it belongs to Randy, Karen, and Dawn. The fourth of Doug's children, Jane, passed away in the early 2000s. The old camp had a big veranda or porches all the way across the front, sides, and back. These pictures were taken in 1956, just before it was torn down. With the kitchen on one end and the dining room on the other, the porch connected everything. Massive shutters were on the porch to keep out the rain. There were no windows on it, just screens and shutters. So on a rainy day, the inside was very dark. The following 3 pictures show the teardown in 1956 and the saving of the fireplace. The young man in the picture is Paul Fleming. Swen Flostron from Keewatin built the new camp from scratch with plans designed especially for camps or cottagers. It was built around the old fireplace. As the camp progressed, Nana, Teeny, sat trying to look out at the lake and realized the windows would not be low enough. So she drew a chalk line to point out where she wanted the bottom of the windows for the best view, and the builders lowered the windows. The present camp is obviously the second building on the property. The only original part of the first camp is the ice house, which is situated behind the camp. In those days, ice was cut from the frozen Lake of the Woods in the winter and put in the ice house. The ice house had 3 walls of shelves where the ice would be placed and packed with sawdust. That was their refrigeration for the summer. Chunks would be chipped off and placed in the ice box. Randy remembers ice being used when he was a small child, except at that time the ice came from the Coney Island store. The present camp on Coney is built in the typical style of most camps or cottages of the time. There is 1 large living room, dining room area. The bedrooms, kitchen, and bathroom are off from that room, and the original fireplace is in the center. So there would be 3. There's the fireplace. A fellow named Jim Kelly did the stonework on the wall to the front of the camp, seen here behind a young Doug in the early 30s. Jim lived down the boardwalk on Coney, and his name was in that cement for years. The camp also had a summer house for many years. It was built in 1935 on the point of land under the big old white pine tree. When Berta, Georgie, Aggie, and Patsy were young, they spent their summers at Coney. The next 2 pictures are of Berta and Patsy, with Charlie in the second one, in Lake of the Woods, obviously. And here we see Teeny, Doug, and Marge, where the summer house was later built. And they are in their, as Bill was saying, in their summer garb for the time. Down in the back of the camp was a wired-off section where they had chickens running around. They also had a vegetable garden. There were no neighbors on either side at that point. 13 years later, in 1926, the Tullys bought next door. And even though the Tullys hadn't built yet, they often came and stayed in a tent for part of the summer. Mr. Tully was the superintendent of the Western Division of the CPR, based in Winnipeg. Charlie Jackson and Mr. Tully shared a boathouse by the subway. When Edgar Jackson and Frank Horan were teens in the late 20s, they were taking Charlie's inboard boat out when the fumes ignited and blew the boat up. They were not hurt and managed to push Mr. Tully's boat out before the boathouse burned up. But Charlie's boat that blew up is shown here. It's called the Oriole. And I don't know who the people are on there. That was a picture that was on the wall at the camp. Next door to the Tullys was the vice president of the CPR, Everett Main. His wife was the former Swea Olson of Kenora. Many of the present-day families on Coney have been there for a few generations. For instance, the wife and mother in the Scrimger family, which is now Tully's old camp, is Mary Margaret O'Flaherty, whom Randy met when she was 7 months old. The O'Flahertys had also been going to Coney for years. And other families were the Johnsons, the Beatties, the McLeods, predominantly business owners in town. The Goods and the Hursts also would have been on Coney at the beginning of the last century with the Jacksons. They had a tourist camp lodge. Randy thinks there were 5 tourist camps on Coney when he was young in 1950s, and they would be cabin rental type lodges. The store down at the beach was a big drawing card in the first half of the 20th century. It was large, with a 2-bedroom apartment at the back. There were pinball machines in there, and they could even hold dances. Not only did they sell popcorn and cotton candy, but they also sold basic groceries. There was no need to travel to town for your everyday needs. And change houses were rented out so the day tripper to Coney could get changed. And then there was the dance hall further down, and a big slide near where the present store is. Now this is an old postcard showing just how many people visited Coney, both day trippers and those who lived there in the summer. The big slide is on the left, and it was torn down around 1960. I know it was gone when I came here in 66. There was the possibility of kids hurting themselves on it. It was a tin and wood structure. Lots of people, though. Blueberry Mountain was in the center of Coney Island. It was always a nice little walk for the kids and their parents. And there were never buckets of blueberries there, but there were some. From the top of that hill, you could get a full view of the island, and it was a big trip for them to go to Blueberry Mountain. Many years later, after Charlie Jackson died and Doug had a young family, the 7 of them, the 6 in the family plus Nana, would head to Coney every summer. They went May long weekend and often stayed into September if it was nice. The kids would be dropped off at the subway dock and head to school at Central School. There were always boats around, and if not, there was the ferry. Doug went to work often on the ferry with Don Pitt, Don McLeod, Jim Johnson, Chess Scott, and Frank Townsend. He would take the 8:10 ferry to town and return at 6. The family often traveled as well to Coney by way of the Argyle. Teenie Jackson's mother had died in childbirth when her younger brother Doug was born. So when her father was away with his work as a bridge inspector, Christina lived at the Frasers on Station Hill in Keewatin, and the Frasers owned the Argyles 1 and 2. Captain Alf and Pat Fraser ran the boat. Jimmy Sweet, who was a captain on the Argyle 2 off and on over the years, also lived in Keewatin when Nana was growing up. So when those young Doug Jackson offspring traveled by the Argyle, they headed straight up to the wheelhouse. Jimmy Sweet let Randy and Jane help steer and ring the bells. The captain would say, "I need 3 bells," and one of them would ring the bell 3 times. The youngest Jackson, Donnie, eventually got his captain's papers and was captain on the Argyle for a few years. The residents of Coney Island made lifelong friends. People from all over the country came for the summer and played together and became great friends. Randy thinks the majority of them are still on Coney. The Willettes, the Hearsts, the Forlongs, the Frasers, the Johnsons, and the O'Flahertys. So for this reason, Coney has a real sentimental draw. It's the same faces every year. Even the new people next door, the Havorkas, have been there for 30 years. Jennifer Edwards Schott, who runs the store at Coney, is a 3rd-generation Coney Islander. Her mother was a Higgins, whose family had purchased the Forsyth camp of 5 cabins and then ran it as Higgins Camp, and now it's their summer camp. In the summers of the 1950s to the 1970s, there were hundreds of Kenora children at Coney taking swimming lessons both morning and afternoon or just enjoying the beach. There was also an Italian soccer league that played on the field, and so there were some big-time games played there. Most school, church, and community organization picnics were also held at Coney. Today, Coney is a hidden gem for many. People don't realize what is there, and with no ferry service, many can't get there. However, the shuttles are starting to gain momentum, and the maybe annual festival is also helping Coney be recognized. Now, these last 5 pictures are just pictures that show why they went to Coney for 100 years. So we have Doug and Marge, and I don't know what he's on there. I don't think it's skis. Anyway, and the last one is the view, a sunset view from the Jackson camp. Karen Jackson says that Randy is the historian of the family, and she is the emotional champion. Her comment on Coney, "It never fails to astound me that when I round the buoy at the point and view the beach and camps, I'm transported to a world of happiness."